try to recap, make sure all of you get this. Work in pairs. Milestone 1, extremely simple. We learned something from assignment 1, right? It's just the basic form. So by now, you know that on the home page, it's just like that, right? Any question about the room thing? So I'm lazy here, right? I don't need the controller, but it's okay if you declare this in the controller, right? So you can use this list group to make it prettier, but that's it. Link to the room, and then this form for room new. So that's milestone 1. And of course, you should be able to do this without looking at anyone else's code. It should be in, if you cannot memorize this, go and memorize it. What, you can do a room params, or you can write it right here. Same thing, right? And if it's this, you cannot create a room, that just redirect. Any question about milestone 1? Right. Milestone 2, the main difference is that now you have to deal with nested routes. So again, you have to be able to handle, this is in a room, right? So first, to be able to go to a room, which is by now you have to know this is nested routes. Rooms, room ID. When you're not sure, go to rail/info and look at the routes. And there's a room messages path here, room ID. What is this? Param room ID. Okay? So some of you may find this easy now, but make sure everything is clear. So what's the difference? When you go to this messages thing, it will go to index action, messages here, index. And now when in nested, in most of the time you do this, load room, or you can put this line up there, right? Room, find, params. So what's the difference? Usually you do room.messages instead of messages.all, message.all. You use room.messages.build. If you have a show action, then you use room.messages.find. So you don't find a message that is in another room. It's safer, right? If I do that show, for example, if you have it, then you actually have the ID, right? Then you have to do find params ID. That's a message ID. But the room I already load, right? I load the room before. Is that clear? So nested routes is very powerful. I already explained it in our lecture. So look into the video again. Nested routes, this guy. So it makes sense. So the difference in creating, also make sure you understand this. You should not need to look up and go copy some code. You can write this in your heart. All right. Now, then milestone 3, it asks, this is the knowledge of sign in, sign out. And I designed it so it's just simple. What is exactly current user? It means get the current user from the session. But we're not using a user model, right? So what do? I just cheat. That's just that. I store, someone say that Harley is my username. I put it in the session. I return it. That's it. And I put helper session, this helper method, so I can use it in the view. Right? When you create a message, I'm not passing it through the form. I just get it from the session. That's why you have an extra field here. Make sense? With that, the login form is a little funny, right? You just have one field, username, and when you submit, you go straight to login path, and then in that login path, this thing, you just convert these params, you store to username. I do .presence, it just, if it's an empty string, it becomes nil, that's all. So you're done with milestone 3. It helps you understand that logic. And as you can see, we have a very simple login form. There's no password here. Milestone 4 is something that this week is new. All milestone 1 to 3 is to test your understanding. If you don't know this, if you were stuck, go home and do it. Make sure you can do this in your sleep. 1, 2, 3. Milestone 4 is a little interesting, right? This is the new stuff to learn. So first, you know that by adding a format.json, then you can do this. If I have any messages, so I start having the first messages. I'm a guest. Not sure what happened there. Uh-oh. Also, I have some code that is still reloading random stuff. I need to get rid of that. So let's get rid of go to messages, index. This one, right? I will delete this guy first. Okay. Whoops, wrong. So I create a message. For some reason it's disappearing. Okay. I refresh. Okay. This is not loading the right message. How do we debug this one? Go to messages, index. I think I just added something that caused a problem. Index up here, load room group messages. Let's check, right? Okay, I'm in the middle of implementing socket. So let's check what the last message I just create. There is just nothing. All messages are empty. So if I create here, I think what's happening there? It's using Ajax to append this, but I think this message is invalid. It doesn't pass the validation. Weird, huh? Let's debug this together. When I submit, it goes to messages create. So when you run into a situation like this, it's not creating anything, right? Then I think I accidentally delete a message.save or something. Yeah. So you see, let's put the save thing outside. So let's say I save, and then here actually I ask if it's saved or not. Okay. So let's try one more time. Hey, I'm a guest, and it's saved, right? Now, when you're stuck, you're like, oh, did it save? Did it crash? And you actually add save here, so you can get it to crash. All right. So this week you learned this thing, right? I added one extra thing here. It means when you format.js here, so that it's really fast, right? That's using form remote, right? So that one I'll cover in a minute. But what we learned from the other day is this: format.json, right? If you do JSON, it means you can do .json here. It's clear, right? No, it's not in there. So this one is clear, right? Yeah.
So this is basically for like an API for another program.
Yes. JSON will be the most popular if you use a front-end framework, Angular JS, React JS, all of that. You can even use jQuery to display. I'm showing you the simplest way to use jQuery to display, right? So because I know I'm explaining to you guys that there's a thing called JSON here, but how does it work? So say you have jQuery, then you do .getJSON, then you can pass in the entire thing up here. Okay? So you can paste the entire URL, or you can just type the final part. It's smart enough. You see, it's smart enough to get the whole link. But just pass the whole thing. And most of you now know it's window dot what? Location. You just say location without window, it will still work. And then .json here, right? Whatever it is, you know this is the URL. If you call getJSON on this, jQuery.getJSON, and you pass in this, you get back, right? Look at the server. The server just take this as a JSON, it returns the JSON to you. You can look into the network tab, and click on it, you can actually see the structure. How can we use this structure, right? So I show you guys that you can test in here. In here is JavaScript. So start to become familiar with JavaScript. If you want data back, you have to pass in the callback function. So this is your data. And then if I have a function that just print the data, so that's the data, right? And close it. Does that make sense? Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Does that make sense? This one over here. So if I do this, you can see in your code, right? If you just run this, it goes to the next line, but this function is still running in the background. So that's why you need this function data to capture the result. Okay? So that's what I just did. I say, show me the data. So it shows you these guys, 4 guys, right? What are these 4 things? What are these 4 things? Right, so if you go to the .json, you see the 4 blocks there. These are the 4 messages. And they are JavaScript object. Looks like Ruby hash. And then they have the content in there. Right?
Let me just say it one more time so I can get this clear. This right here is getting from the URL. This is getting the URL right here.
Yep.
This is the callback function.
Yep.
And it's going to store this information when
it's successful.
When it completes the function. And this right here just basically displays for us.
Right. So in some cases, look, you can do this. If you want, how do you get, for example, I can say I have A as an empty array. Okay? And then down here, instead of console data, I just say append this to, just say pass it to A. So when it's done, then I have my A. Right? If let's say, if I want A to be a list of content, only the content, okay? Then I will do this. A is an empty array. And I get JSON, but in this function, I will do it over multiple, I can't do it multiple line now. Control, Shift, Enter, okay, here. All right, so then you can say, for I is 0, I less than data.length, it's an array, right? Or I use it this way, I in data, this is another function. In this function, you say A, you push one value to A, right? What is it? Data I dot content, right? So I'm writing this to make sure you are comfortable with JavaScript. So if I type A now, what do you think will happen? It's an array of all the chat messages. Okay, so be okay playing with this thing. Some of you will find it really strange that it's possible to do this in the browser because this is not asynchronous. You can do this result and then you can say result dot response ration, and that's also object. But you cannot do it over in your code, okay? Until you learn how to deal with asynchronous calls. So JavaScript provides something called promise, and we can handle those. But for this purpose, just learn how to use the callback. So what exactly happened with our milestone here? I say just define a function. In this function, you call getJSON. It means now after you define this function, then you can go to the terminal here and then you can test it. Right? So let's look at our getJSON. Make sure you really understand it. So it's quite simple. This line is just getting the right URL. In some cases, if you write this, it still works. It just replaced the last part, messages, and then it changed to this, okay? So this is the extension that Rails understand. Now then, what is it? Data. But in this data, because you know it's messages, so you can name it like this so it's clearer to the reader. Does that make sense? Of course, normally it's called data, right? So what am I doing here? I use jQuery. So if you don't understand this, go to the console and then you type dot messages. when you type this, what is it? It's like I told you the other day, dot, it means div dot, right? And if you see these as nothing, if you make a typo, right, it will return nothing. So what happens when you return nothing? Maybe you should name your code. You should wrap all the messages in a container, right? I did that. I put them in a container called messages. And it's usually good practice for each of them. You can call message, right? So jQuery is cool here because if you just want div dot messages, you get one guy, which is the container. If you do dot message, it will return all the ones that match. So usually you can find by a class name like that. If you want to find by ID name, then, you know, for example, message 123, then you can also do that. But you have to make sure you put the ID in there. Okay? If you're curious how to do that, this is a common one. So in this message, right, you see there's a class message here. You can say ID is message, and you can say underscore message.id. So now if you remove any message, you know what to do with the JavaScript, right? Because you can call it. So let's see. If I refresh this and I do this message thing, you see each one of them has an ID. And now I can call, if I want to delete message ID 1, I just say pound message 1 right there, and I can remove. Then you see this one disappear. You can get the second one and you can remove. Play around with JavaScript. That is jQuery, right? This is so common. This is very common. It becomes a convention, right? So you can write that with DOM ID and then pass in the thing. So that's the same. Okay? Right. Is that clear? This is also so common that it becomes a convention. So you can replace the whole thing with div for message do. But then, you know, that's a bit of magic. I think Rails removed that because it's too magic. Has been removed. So people, you can you can add this, but people do this so much that because you can pass in other class name here, extra stuff. So to make, if you look at Rails in your old source code, they use it, but now if you want it, you have to include this gem. So in general, I don't like to do this because it's not clear to a programmer who is like a Python expert. Come over and is like, what is this thing, right? So you want this to be just, this is the most common one. DOM ID is very nice, right? You don't have to type the same thing again, okay? So I have an extra n here. So we know that this update by JSON is nothing new, so you play with this. Now most of the time when you use the DOM, when you can get the DOM, so one more time, I get this DOM. I can decide what to do with it, and one thing that is really common is I can get to see all the HTML. If you don't pass any argument, it's called a reader. It reads the content, right? If you pass in the argument, what does it mean? It's a writer. It's a setter. Then it just writes the whole content in.
Doesn't Rails have readers and writers?
Ruby, it's called reader and writer. In Java, you go setter and getter. In some other languages. Okay? So, what's interesting, right, is that jQuery has some magic. So let's say if you have this guy, there are 4 of them. What happens when you say append hello? It appends to all of them. So no little things like that, right? It may help. You can even do this. You can do something like add class, right? Maybe you say, oh, I want to make it danger. Done, right? You just add 2 class that Bootstrap does. So you have to understand this if you're full stack JavaScript guy, right? Sometimes you want it to fade out, type that, and then they just disappear. Right? So this is the jQuery thing, and you spend, oh, I need to do this. Probably jQuery, and you can look up for more function. So I'm doing the most stupid way here. Okay? We did not use ID, so I didn't want to think too much. Right? So I can say set everything to empty and then try it again. If you want a more efficient way, what is another efficient way? You can look through in all the messages here, and then you only find the element that doesn't exist and you append it. There's just many ways, but all of that is just small thing, right? As you become better, you can write better code. Okay? Now the interesting thing, I showed this in lecture the other day. So this is the long format. GetJSON is exactly that, except data type is JSON. So when you send a JavaScript, you can set different things. So the most two common type is script or JSON. So because it's so common, you can do GetJSON, or down here you can say GetScript. And then because it GetScript, you can just say window.location.pathname plus .js. The difference between these two things, when you do extension here, then Rails know what it is. You're calling for JavaScript type, right? If you don't pass an extension, then you pass in this one. Rails also know what it is. It comes from the header. So there are two ways for Rails to know, you're asking for JavaScript, not JSON or not HTML. So how does it know? Then it goes down here, this line. Right? So that's the next milestone. And when you implement this milestone, one step at a time. First, you know that I call this getScript, right? First thing you know, it's going to call .js, right? If you just do .js, you write only JavaScript. You do .erb, you write the whole thing. And what I normally like to do, I just say, why not just write something like this? So now, I go back to this browser and I can test .getScript messages.js. Well, again, it's smart enough. These messages will change the thing before after the slash, right? But you can just pass in the whole thing. And when you call that script, it will run this JavaScript over here. Right? So now you know it's in there. So what if I carry the idea over here? So you can do the same thing, right? But it's a little different because this guy can be generated by the server. So I can say this thing, same thing. I can do that, but now I have to set the HTML to something, right? But what do I have? I have the messages variable from the controller. Because this is just a view file, right? Because I have the messages variable, so I can render them. Right? And I told you guys, when you render, it will, let's do that right now. If you just do this, Rails still run. Look at the server here, okay? Look at that guy, and I do one more time. Let me get script. Run this, it run correctly, but you see nothing happen. And then you can either click here or you can go to the network tab and look at the last response. Oh, it's rendering nothing because I didn't put the change equal. So I say one more time, down here, run, and then I can click here, go here, I click here one more time. You see something funny here. I want to make sure you guys understand this. It will happen to everyone. This is no longer correct JavaScript because there's an equal here, there's an equal here, and you see the highlighting? That's why you need to pass in escape JavaScript, right? So that's a long form, okay? You see the text editor actually turned blue, right? It understands that syntax. So that's why you call it J. So then because it's J, just test one thing at a time, and then when you click here, try this, you see it escaped properly, and I have this JavaScript that does this. So don't just rely on Rails. I can mess up my messages, right? I can just say HTML, mess it up here, see? But if I call get script, it will get there and it should replace this guy. And why does it not replace? Because it doesn't know what E is. It's still a wrong JavaScript. So it failed quietly. E is messages, right? So if I do it one more time, ready? Then now it runs this and it's correct. So it fails quietly, right? So it's not exactly nice. You see that one? So all the milestone today is to get you to understand how to use JavaScript, jQuery, JSON, and JS. So read through this and that give you the recap of the content. And then from next week, we will learn more about using WebSocket. If you have time, you can try this at home. Any more question about the lab?
About the set, to new a lot of things. Why do you need the set E to new every time you load?
New, where, which one?
I mean set new E to nothing.
Oh, here it's just a lazy way. You set it as nothing. By the way, JavaScript, you don't need this, but most of the time it's better to put it. Why do you set this? Oh, here, for example, if you don't do this, we're using a pen, so all the messages will become twice, right? Will appear again, right? There's another way, right? You can, this is a lot of ways here. You can be smarter. Just think, oh, what if I don't want to render it again? How do I do it? The way that I would like to do, I mentioned this in class, but you can actually pass in here the params of the latest ID, right? Blah, blah, right? So this can be tricky. After you use it a little bit more, then you will understand how to do it. So even here, I can just say data, latest ID, and I can pass in here, for example, I'm being really lazy here, right? Messages.last.id. Are you ready? So if I do this here, where's the other form? Let's try this. Load this. I pass in this guy. So you see latest ID is 4. So there's nothing that prevents you from getting this value. So you have this element message. This guy, right? But then you can get the latest ID. Actually, this may not work, but then it gives you 4. You can set anything. It's just, it's just an attribute. So, for example, what are the other attributes that you learn? Like, get the class name, get the attribute name, this way. Okay, so because I know this latest ID, I can pass it in to the URL. Some of you may prefer to pass in the URL, for example, data, URL, and then you write here, right? Room messages path, and then pass in the room here. Because we cannot use this route helper in the JavaScript file, right? So then you can call this, you set this E outside, and then down here you just send it to E dot, something like that, right? Data, what? URL, right? Then it understand. Okay. Obviously, this is just HTML format. So you either do this and you do .json, or the correct way is to say format is JSON, and it passed the right format. Okay. So if you refresh this, go into this, that's the data URL. You can send to that value. All right.